Welcome to First Draft Friday. I am your host, Alessandra Torre with Authors AI, and today I am joined by Debbie Weiss, who is going to be talking all about breaking through your self-imposed boundaries, overcoming hurdles to write your first book or potentially your 10th book, wherever you're at in your process. And Debbie's book is titled On Second Thought, Maybe I Can. So I'm excited to talk to her about her book and about her process and her own boundaries that she broke through. So welcome so much to the show. It's great to have you here, Debbie. To all of our listeners watching, don't be shy. Feel free to comment and interact with us during the broadcast. But Debbie, do you want to just tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I'm always excited when I go on a show that's about authors because I still can't believe that I'm one of them. Um, so, yes, I wrote my memoir on Second Thought, Maybe I Can. It was published August 9th. And I will just tell you that I never thought that I would be an author. I never had any intention of being an author. And my whole life, I was a math numbers person and thought I didn't have a creative bone in my body. But you see, you never
And
know.
now you're here. I
And
love
now
that.
I'm here.
I love that. I also never thought I would write. I was not a numbers person, but I never thought I would write. I just didn't think, I don't know. I thought authors were like lived in New York. I mean, you're in that part of the country, but lived in
I
New York.
am.
I don't know. We're born into like a literary family and, had lunch with agents and stuff. I don't know. I thought it was this whole thing. So, and welcome. I'm seeing some of our regulars in the audience. Hi, Chris. It's great to see you. What prompted this book and kind of what was the journey that got you there? Not all the way to the end, but what
I
is the journey that made you say, you know what, I'm going to write a book?
Sure. Well, I was kind of going through a transformative process of my own, figuring out what did I want in life. I've spent all of my life taking care of other people. I've been a family caregiver for over 40 years to my dad and my husband and my eldest son who has disabilities. And I had a aha moment, which kind of sent me down this path of exploration. And, I have a little bit of a story, and people my whole life would always say, oh, you should write a book. I mean, everyone says that, right? Oh, yeah, yeah, someday I will, but I never really meant it. And all of a sudden, a couple of years ago, I was kind of, like I said, figuring out my path and realized that I had a message that I did want to get out to people. And the book idea kept showing up in front of my face. And I would, say that's ridiculous. And one day I was listening to a podcast that I don't typically listen to. And the host was interviewing a guest who helped first time authors get their story out there. And I felt like she was speaking to me, and she was someone that I felt or would feel comfortable with. And I kind of just gave into my intuition and said, I think this is a sign. And after the podcast was over, I contacted her and I did connect with her. And I told her my fears. I was comfortable adding my fears, sharing my fears, saying, I don't know how to write. Like, how is this even a possibility that I could write a book? And that's how it all started.
So what, if you are comfortable sharing, what were like your fears? Like what were the major reasons why you said, I can't write a book, or I'm not going to think about writing a book? What were those fears?
I have no idea what I'm doing. I felt
Yeah.
that I needed formal training. I honestly, and you're younger than I am, so I don't know if these books are still out there, but growing up, I learned to read on See Dick Run, See Jane Run, and I really envisioned that's what my book was going to sound like. And who would want to buy that book? I felt like it was not, I'm no literary genius, so who would want to read that? And then I thought to myself, what do I like to read? Do I like to read the classics? classics? No, I don't. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I
Right.
want to read a book that's relatable. And so if that's what I want to read, then there must be somebody else out there who's going to enjoy to read things just like I did.
I agree with that. And I think I meet so many people, especially younger people, or especially people like in their 20s or 30s, who's like, oh, I'm not a reader. And I think a lot of people, they're not readers because the only books they're exposed to are the books that we read in school. Right. And those are the
Absolutely.
classics. Right. And the classic, I'm with you. Like, I don't want to read a classic. Like, it's hard for me to read a classic. I don't enjoy reading. I like contemporary fiction. And so I think people think they don't like to read, or they might think that they can't write like this, or don't want to write like this. And really, they just haven't met their type of book yet. And those that are voracious readers, we all know we love to read because we found what we love to read, and we went outside that. But I think for so many people, they only read what they're required to read, and what they're required and then they have to analyze it to the nth degree, and that takes kind of all that fun and and love out of it. We did have a question on YouTube from Danny. They said, what was the name of that podcast?
So it was Powerhouse Women with Lindsay Schwartz.
Powerhouse Women with Lindsay Schwartz.
Yep. And it was about, I mean, she the podcast is geared towards female entrepreneurs.
And so you did end up working with that. Were they a writing coach? Is that what they were?
Yeah. So actually, she was just about to launch a 12-week course for first-time authors. And simultaneously to this, out of the blue, my husband was diagnosed with terminal blood cancer.
Wow.
Prior to that, he had been ill and had physical as well as mental illness. So it had been a super tough time in our lives. But this diagnosis was unrelated to anything else. And, I didn't know what was in store. I do work full time. I was able to work from home and luckily was able to stop going into my office and really not having to work too much. But the course was going to start and I hadn't signed up for it yet. And then we got this news. And I went to my therapist and I said, I'm embarrassed to even tell you that I'm considering taking this course during this time. I told her my fears, what if there's homework, what if I have to write a certain amount of words or whatever it is each week and I can't do it because of my situation with Gary, my husband. And what if we go on the group and they make us read our work and then people are going to judge me? I had so many fears. And, I was a good student, so I don't want to sign up for this class and not be able to show up and do all the things that I was meant to do. And in the end, she said to me, I actually think that this is the perfect time for you to do this because you need something completely separate
You need
from
an
everything.
escape.
Yep. And she was right. So I took the course. It was a small group of people who were all in the same boat, all writing,
All the same fears.
Exactly. And so quickly those fears were, taken away. And I looked forward to our meeting each week. As a matter of fact, I still meet. There's different people in the group now, but today at 1:00, I still have the meeting and it's something I look forward to every week. And what I did was, since my life and my schedule was all over the place, I was very dedicated to making sure each day or most days I wrote for at least, a period of time. Some days it could only be 20 minutes. Other days, maybe it was an hour. When they had co-writing sessions, I really tried to attend. I needed that accountability. And my husband lived for 6 months. And when he passed away, I was about 2 chapters shy of finishing.
Wow. That's amazing. I have two things to say. One, I think one of the best books I ever wrote was when my husband was going through cancer. He survived, and I'm very
Good.
sorry for your loss. But it was the same thing. Like we were spending our days in chemo and radiation, and all of that, and it was like this was an hour and a half each day where I could close my door and I could escape into this other world, and I could focus on that. And it would give me something to think about other than all of the things that we were dealing with financially and health wise and everything else. So I think writing can be such a fantastic escape. Now you were writing a memoir, so it might not have been as much of an escape because you were writing about the things that you had gone through or were going through. But at least from a fictional standpoint, as a fiction author, for me writing a light, funny story that had absolutely no grounds in what I was experiencing was like, it was my salvation, during that time, and something I really needed. The other thing, so do you feel comfortable sharing the name of the course that you took or your instructor?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. So Lauren Eckert is the woman who was the coach, and it's Burning Soul Press.
Lauren Eckert, Burning
Soul Press. Yep.
Soul Press. Okay. All right. Perfect. And so your first fear, and I have to say, I do a class each, like a workshop each year for authors, for newer authors. And the first thing I ask them is like, what are the reasons why you haven't written your story yet? And I give them like 5 multiple choice, and over half, self-doubt is the number one. Over half of them say self-doubt they're only allowed to pick one reason. Self-doubt is the number one. The others are like, I don't have time, I don't have money, I don't know how to do it. I don't even know if that's an option because that kind of falls under self-doubt. But you certainly weren't alone. And one of the nice things about joining a program like that is you quickly realize that kind of everyone else has those similar concerns and doubts that are facing them. But when you started, like, how did you go from, I don't know anything and I don't even know where to start, and I have this story that I want to tell, but I don't even know how to tell it. What was kind of the first steps that you went through that made that manageable and gave you a path forward?
Boy, that was one of the hardest parts, is not knowing. I had so many questions, and along with the group, there was a course, that took you through a series of exercises that helped you kind of put it together. And it took me a long time to figure out what is the structure. And I really had a lot of roadblocks with writing until I figured that out. And I had to decide, do I want it to be just stories? Is it going to be a memoir? Is it going to be self-help? Like, I didn't understand, since I was new to this, what is the difference? Am I going to tell a story and then am I going to come out of the story and give a message or give an exercise? So I was trying to figure that out. Would the structure of the book, just with a bunch of stories not really linked together, would that work? So I played with a lot of different things. And in the end, and I did have help from Lauren, from the group, from the course. And it did take a while for me to decide what it's going to look like. And it is just a compilation of stories. It is not a self-help book. It is just stories of my life that in the end are inspirational to someone, realizing that you have the power to change your life regardless of what's happening.
I love that. And it is much more, I can see it being very difficult. I've never written a memoir, but I can see that being really hard, because especially if you are straddling the self-help line, and a lot of memoirs are, figuring out that structure. So when you said it took you a long time, like, what is a long time? Like, did it take weeks or months to figure out kind of the structure? Did you end up writing something and deleting it? Were you working off an outline? What was that process?
So it probably took a month, let's say, of figuring it out. And no, I don't think I ever really had to delete anything, maybe just move things around. But once I had the outline, oh my goodness, then it got so much easier. And the other thing, as a first time author, maybe it's my numbers thing, I don't know. I had in my head, I had to write it in order. Why? Why did I think that? I mean, especially me, because it was a bunch of individual stories. And when I realized I didn't have to do that, that was so freeing that each day then I would open up my computer, look at my outline and say, what do I feel like talking about today?
Yeah, I think I'll
And
write this.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure I've never written a fiction book, but I'm sure that's very different, obviously, than this. There, you don't really have much of a choice, I would assume.
Yeah, I say yes and no because if you're pantsing, if you're not working off an outline,
Yep.
then yeah, it's hard to write out of order because you don't know what's happening until you're writing it. You know, oftentimes you're figuring out as you're going. But for someone with an outline, but it's interesting because I was talking to a new author the other day, and she was really struggling because she didn't know what she wanted to happen in the next scene. She knew what she wanted to happen like 5 scenes from now, like, but she didn't know how to get like from one place to another like smoothly. And she was new. So, you know, she's only written like 5 scenes in her life, you know, or 10 scenes in her life, you know, it's still a new thing for her. And I was like, just go start writing from where you know you're getting to and go from there. And she's like, what do you mean? Like and it was the same thing. Like I can write out of order or I can just skip forward. And I said, yeah, you can just come back and write those scenes later. And it was like, it was just such an unlocking thing. And again, once then you finish the book, then it's much easier to say, oh, you know, I'll use these as a connector, or you'll know more. You'll say, oh, I need to add a hint to something happening, so I'll put it in there.
Exactly.
So I love that. We do have a question from Chris on YouTube, and he said, how did you overcome any self-doubt while writing a book of such heavy stories? Did you just keep going, rode on your book writing ignorance, so to say?
Good question, Chris. So I think once I got started and I wrote a couple of stories and I shared them with Lauren and the group and I got positive feedback, that was helpful. You know, I think that started to alleviate some of the self-doubt. And then also the realization of stop judging myself. I'm just putting this on paper. Nobody's reading this first draft, or, you know, the public's not reading this first draft. It's okay. If I wind up scrapping it, it's okay. You know, this is all a learning process. Some of my stories were heavy. Actually, I mean, I don't think as a reader they were, but for me, just like you said before, putting myself back in those situations, you know, some things like remembering how I felt when I was 5 years old. It was amazing. I never understood when people would say how cathartic that is.
Yeah.
I just didn't understand until I did it. And then I realized in order to share the story with impact, I have to let the reader know what was going through my mind, how I was feeling. And so I had to put myself back there. And in the end, there were some days, Chris, I'm telling you, there was a couple of stories that after I was done or in the middle, I had to stop and cry. But it was a release. And so it helped to keep going because it was cathartic. And even though it was heavy, it was still different than what was going on with my husband.
Did it cause you to look at things in sometimes some things in the past in a different way? Like because you were looking at telling the story? Like I would just be curious if it would allow you to maybe forgive like past, I mean, I don't know the situations, so I don't know what I'm talking about really, but
Yeah.
I would just be curious if it caused you to kind of walk in different shoes as you were going back and re-examining that event and the situations around it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can say, you know, just figuring out what stories to put in the book where I would have a story I didn't even realize I had a story to tell.
Yeah.
You know, it really is a whole process of self-examination and and thinking about, well, what did happen in my life to cause me to, have this limiting belief, to cause me to have this victim mentality that I had for such a long time. What were the circumstances? And so as I did write it, for sure, sometimes I had some aha moments like, oh, so that's how I felt. Or, a lot of the story had to do early on with my mother. My parents were divorced. My father had a stroke when I was 17, and I wound up being his caregiver for the next 30 years. And
Wow.
so, I had some maybe unresolved feelings towards my mother, even though she didn't do it on purpose to put me in this situation. Putting myself back, my mother was 39 years old. I'm writing it at 59, thinking, gee, 39, and understanding, trying to understand from my mother's perspective a little more what was happening was definitely let me release some of that resentment that I had.
That is so interesting. And so in the writing group, you posted some early, now from a fictional standpoint, we have scenes, right? So, and we're writing either first person or third person. I'm assuming you were writing in first person.
Yes.
And was it? Were you telling it past tense, like in the summer of whatchamacallit? I was living here. I was doing this. One day this happened. Was it that sort? Is that sort of the storytelling narrative?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All
yes.
right. And so your scenes are how long would typically a scene be for you?
You know what? That was another question. That was another interesting thing that I hadn't thought of that was brought up. Do the chapters have to be equal size? Right? Because
Right.
some of my stories were not
Some
so
are short,
long.
some are
Yeah.
long. Yeah.
Yeah. And, at one point, once we were in the editing process, the editor wanted to take two of the stories and combine them into one chapter. And I didn't want to do that because I felt like that didn't happen anywhere else. Who cares? Like I never think about it as a reader. I'm always thinking as a reader, am I noticing this? No. Oh, this one's only 3 pages and this one's 12.
Yeah.
I don't care.
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah. So, I just told the individual stories, wrote the individual stories, and was pleased.
So you outlined. So if I go through your process, you figured out your structure, you wrote an outline, you then just started going through and cherry picking and writing the scenes in whatever order you wanted.
Correct.
You wrote your all of the scenes in the outline. And what was your final, what was your word count at that point in time?
Oh gosh. At the end, I wound up with 83,000 words.
Wow. That's a significant, yeah.
That's what Lauren said.
After edits and everything.
No, actually, yes, I think after edits, that's what it came down to. It might've been 86,000 or something like that. Now, after I did add an epilogue 3 months after my husband passed away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's when we were in edits, I added that. So yeah, that's what Lauren said. She's like, for someone who said they couldn't write and a first-time author, this is a lot of words. I said, well, I talk a lot, so that makes sense.
I love that. Someone said, have you ever, writing a book first time around was quite the accomplishment. Have you ever in your life kept a journal? If so, would you say that practice helped you with your writing later in life?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. I had never kept a journal. Ever. I mean, as a kid, I always wanted the little diary with the lock, but, nothing. I never did it long term. And in, my time of transformation, or I guess we're always still transforming, journaling was something that I was introduced to and was very resistant. I mean, just the thought of looking at a blank piece of paper and I'm supposed to write something was terrifying. I could not understand how anyone could do that. So I don't remember what I was doing. I think I was taking a course, and in the course they sent you a journal, but it had prompts. So that was a little less intimidating to me. I still didn't like it, but I stuck with
Felt
it.
like a chore?
What?
Was it that it felt like a chore?
I think it was more, who did I think was reading this journal and grading me? I think it was that kind of thing. Like,
Uh-huh.
what if I write the wrong thing? You know, there was a part for affirmations. I'm not sure what that means. What if I write the wrong thing? Am I allowed to write the same thing 2 days in a row? Like that kind of thinking. Once I got past that and gave myself the permission to do whatever I wanted, I really started enjoying it. It actually was probably about 3 months before I heard Lauren on the podcast. I had heard another podcast who talked about the benefit of free form journaling. And I thought to myself at that point, okay, now like you're a journaler, you're doing this, just try it. And I sat down that first day and no prompt or anything. And I started writing. I remember they said, so start writing. You know, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be saying here. You know, that's kind of how I started. I'm telling you, I don't even know if it was 15 minutes later when I looked up, my hand was hurting. My writing took a story from, I don't know what I'm going to say, to some deep thing that I didn't even know I was thinking about. And that was it. I was hooked. And it honestly was because of that gave me a teeny bit of confidence that I didn't want to admit. Maybe I can do this because look at what I've just written.
Yeah, there are words in me, obviously. There are things like, that can come out. Okay, so we only have 3.5 minutes left.
Okay.
And we do have a few more questions have come in. So David said, in therapy, there's a process called journaling. It sounds like maybe you were doing something similar. That's not really a question, but just chiming in. Danny said, did you ever think, will anyone want to read this?
Oh gosh, please, all the time. All the time. Who's going to want to read this? And the fear when you let someone read it for the first time, oh my gosh, that was intense.
Mm-hmm.
Just giving it over to the editor, I think she was going to have it for 2 weeks. And sometimes I would like see her on Zoom or in something else. I'm like, oh, Allison, so how's it going? Like baiting her, please, just give me
Please
something.
tell me how amazing this book is.
Exactly. So that was a very long 2 weeks of my life. But yes, I definitely think, did anybody want to read that? And also I've shared some extremely personal things that we didn't even really talk about that portion of doing something like this. It is very scary.
I can't even imagine. So was it hard for you letting your family and friends know about it with this awareness that they were going to have this like intimate look into your life and into your history and your feelings?
Absolutely. And different people I had different feelings about, right?
Yeah.
What they were going to think and how they were going to perceive this. And there was one story in particular that I did not have in the original outline because it was something I was too ashamed to write about. And really nobody in nobody knew. Nobody knew the extent of the situation. And it was about money. And in the end, I decided that if I'm writing this to inspire people, I need to be completely honest and completely open, because if I don't write about that, maybe I'm shutting off a whole group of people, who could relate to this.
Yeah. Who need to hear.
Yeah. And I said, if you're going to do it, you've got to do it 100%.
I agree with that. And I sent an email out like to my list in the last year. And it was really like I had a failure, like, right. And I had talked about that. And I was so not sure about sending it because it was just like, I was like, gosh, I really don't want to share. Like, I feel bad about this. And now I'm sharing with others. But it was like, maybe this will help. I did learn some lessons. Let me share. I got so many responses from that were so appreciative, so yeah, I think and was it also so a little cathartic for you to write that?
I was scared at that point. What I found now afterwards is I cannot believe I just gave a talk at a women's expo and I opened with the story about the money. And afterwards I thought, can you believe you're standing up here talking to like 100 people, telling them the secret that you said you would never
You
share?
protected so much. Yeah.
And now it feels amazing because it's something that I lived with and suffered with for
Yeah.
so many years.
Yeah. Well, it was absolutely wonderful to talk to you. Thank you to everyone in our audience who was here and who participated. If you're watching the replay, thank you for watching the replay. Please leave a comment. And if y'all are interested in reading Debbie's book, you can find out more about her at debbierweiss.com. I posted it here. We'll also put it in the chat. And where can you just give them the name of your book again and where they can find it?
Sure. On second thought, maybe I can, sitting right back there. And it's on, all the normal places online, Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, that kind of thing.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined us. We'll see you in another 2 weeks at another First Draft Friday. Thank you again, Debbie.
Thank you.